Hey guys, tonight we are going to get lost in the bottom of a glass. Picture the drink in front of you. Maybe it's a cool glass of water, maybe something a little stronger. See the way the light passes right through it, clean and clear? You can see the table on the other side. Now imagine that same glass is filled with a hazy brownish liquid, thick with floating specks and a murky cloud of sediment resting at the bottom. That, my friends, is your beverage for most of human history. Tonight's topic, the quest to clarify that murky glass using a truly bizarre ingredient, is so profoundly uneventful that there is a genuine risk you will be asleep before we even get to the fish guts. Don't say I didn't warn you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always find it fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing somewhere in the distant past, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. In your hands you hold a cup, probably a rough clay mug, warm to the touch. Inside is your daily drink, a primitive beer or a young, unfiltered wine. You bring it to your lips, and the first thing you notice isn't the taste, but the texture. It's slightly gritty. There are things floating around that you try your best to ignore. This is the universal experience of drinking for thousands of years. Your beverage is less of a crisp, refreshing liquid, and more of a thin, alcoholic porridge. It's sustenance, a source of calories and hydration, safer than the local river, but it is profoundly, unavoidably murky. This cloudiness comes from the very process that gives you alcohol. Fermentation, wild yeasts, having done their noble work of converting sugars into alcohol, die and remain suspended in the liquid. Along with them are microscopic proteins from the grain or grapes, bits of husk, stray tannins, and other organic debris that just hasn't felt the need to go anywhere. The result is a brew that looks less like something you'd be served at a modern bar and more like pond water after a good stir. For the earliest brewers, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia over 5,000 years ago, this was simply the reality of beer, or cash as they called it. In fact, their beer was so thick with brewing leftovers, mostly bread and grain floating on top, that one of the most common artifacts found from their civilization is the drinking straw. These weren't for fun, they were a practical tool. Depictions from the era show people gathered around a large communal pot, sipping through long reed straws to bypass the chunky layer of debris and drink the slightly less chunky liquid beneath. It was the world's first, and perhaps most necessary, boba straw. But as civilizations evolved, so did tastes. You find yourself wanting something better, something purer. Why did this change happen? Why did clarity suddenly begin to matter? Historians still argue whether the initial drive for beverage clarity was born from a genuine concern for public health or was simply an early form of conspicuous consumption, a way for the elite to distinguish their chalices from the commoner's cloudy mug. On one hand, a hazy drink could be a sign of spoilage. An off-batch could make you sick, and perhaps our ancestors began to associate cloudiness with unpredictability and danger. A clear drink felt controlled, stable, and safe. On the other hand, a clear beverage is a signal of tremendous effort. It requires extra steps, extra time, and specialized knowledge, all things that translate to expense. Imagine you're a wealthy Roman patrician hosting a banquet. Serving a wine that has been painstakingly cleared of its sediment is a quiet but powerful statement. It says, you have the resources to command this level of refinement. It's the ancient equivalent of serving a meal on fine china instead of wooden trenchers. This desire for purity as a status symbol is a deeply human quirk. A flawless diamond is more valuable than a cloudy one. Bottled water commercials emphasize the pristine mountain springs. Clarity implies quality. The quirky truth is that your ancestors' desire for a pretty, see-through drink may have been less about taste and more about social climbing. Spilling your chunky beer on your tunic was just clumsy. Spilling your host's crystal-clear wine was a potential diplomatic incident. So the goal is set, long before anyone has a clue how to achieve it reliably. The problem is universal. From the great halls of Viking lords drinking their hazy mead, to the sun-drenched patios of Egyptian nobles sipping their cloudy date wine. Everyone is tired of chewing their drink. The challenge is immense. How do you convince millions of tiny, stubborn particles, each with a will of its own, to gently fall asleep at the bottom of a barrel? The answer wouldn't be simple, and the first attempts would be a strange and often messy series of trials and errors, a sort of slow-motion science fair that would span centuries. The stage is set for a long, sleepy battle against suspended solids, a quiet war waged in cellars and breweries across the ancient world. So you stand there in the cool, damp air of your cellar, a silent participant in that quiet war. Before you is a large wooden cask, filled with the cloudy fruits of your labor. The slow-motion science fair has begun, and you are its sole, and likely very tired, researcher. There are no manuals, no chemistry sets, just generations of passed-down wisdom, which mostly amounts to, try putting stuff in it. The prevailing logic is simple and surprisingly tactile. Find something sticky, or something that clumps, and maybe, it will grab all those little yeasty ghosts and drag them down into the silent depths of the barrel, leaving behind a clear, beautiful liquid. It's a process born of equal parts hope and guesswork, a culinary art form that borders on alchemy. Your first and most promising set of tools comes from the humble chicken. You take a few eggs, their shells cool and smooth in your hand. You carefully crack one open, letting the thick, gelatinous white slide into a bowl, leaving the yolk behind. With a whisk made of bundled twigs, you beat the egg white into a light froth. Then, you pour this delicate foam onto the surface of the wine or beer in your cask. There is no immediate, dramatic effect. You simply replace the bung and wait. Over the next few days, a subtle magic happens. The protein in the egg white, called albumin, begins to uncurl in the acidic environment of the brew. As it drifts downwards, its molecules act like tiny, sticky nets, attracting and binding with the suspended particles that cause the haze. The Roman naturalist and author Pliny the Elder wrote about this very practice in the 1st century AD, confirming it as a mainstream, if not entirely understood, technique for clarifying wine. It's one of history's earliest and most successful fining agents. If you're out of eggs, perhaps you try a splash of milk. The principal protein in milk, casein, performs a similar trick. When introduced to the acidic wine, it curdles, forming small, solid clumps that slowly descend, grabbing onto unwanted phenols and tannins on their way down. It's less precise than egg whites and could sometimes leave a slightly milky character behind, a flavor profile that thankfully never caught on. You can almost picture some ancient entrepreneur trying to market Chardonnay latte and being quietly exiled for it. Then you move on to the more robust options in the albumin family. This is where things get a bit messy, a bit more rustic. For this, you need blood. Yes, blood. For centuries, particularly in winemaking regions of France, fresh ox blood was a common and remarkably effective fining agent. The serum albumin in the blood works on the very same principle as the albumin in an egg white. You pour a measure of it into the cask, and the proteins coagulate and settle, dragging impurities down with them. It was especially favored for hearty red wines, where any slight reddish tinge left behind would go unnoticed. This is the quirky, slightly grim secret behind some of Europe's historical winemaking, the kind of tidbit that doesn't make it onto the glossy brochures for vineyard tours. It certainly gives a whole new meaning to a full-bodied red. Academics debate whether these early fining techniques were the result of methodical observation. A vintner noticing that a broken egg in a barrel led to clearer wine, or a throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach rooted in local folklore and alchemy. Perhaps it was a bit of both. If protein didn't feel right, you could always turn to the earth itself. You might take a scoop of a very fine, pale clay from a special deposit known only to local brewers. You'd make a slurry, mixing the clay with a little water or wine until it was a smooth paste, and pour that into your barrel. This clay, what we now know as bentonite, works through an entirely different principle: static electricity. The clay particles carry a negative charge, which attracts the positively charged protein molecules that create haze, causing them to clump and settle. It has a method so effective that bentonite is still one of the most widely used fining agents in the world today. But not every experiment is a success. You might try adding powdered charcoal or wood ash, hoping its porous nature will absorb the haze. Instead, you find it has stripped the delicate flavors from your wine, leaving it tasting vaguely of last night's campfire. Each attempt is a long, slow process of addition, waiting and hoping. You add your chosen ingredient, seal the cask, and wait for days or even weeks. Then you must carefully rack the cleared liquid off the thick layer of sludge, the lees, that has formed at the bottom. It's a delicate, nerve-wracking process. One clumsy move and you'll stir it all back up, undoing weeks of patient work. These early methods are your arsenal, but they are all flawed. They are inconsistent, they are messy, and sometimes they make your product taste like a farm animal. The perfect solution remains elusive, a ghost you are chasing in the murky depths of a barrel. The quest for that perfect, elusive clarity continues, but for now you leave the quiet solitude of the experimental cellar and step out into the wider world. The path leads you down a stone-paved street in ancient Rome. The air is a chaotic symphony of smells: baking bread, pungent fish sauce, charcoal smoke, and the ever-present low hum of humanity. You sidestep a cart piled high with goods and duck through a low doorway, escaping the relentless sun. You're in a papana, a common Roman tavern. The room is dark and loud, filled with the boisterous chatter of soldiers, merchants, and laborers unwinding after a long day. The light from the door barely penetrates the smoky haze, illuminating rough-hewn wooden tables and benches packed with patrons. You find a space on a bench and order a cup of wine. The proprietor, a stout man with sweat on his brow, dips a ladle into a massive clay vessel, an amphora, resting in the corner, and sloshes the contents into a simple earthenware cup, which he thumps down in front of you. You look into the cup. There is no glimmer, no jewel-like glint of ruby or gold. The liquid is a dull, cloudy maroon, almost opaque. As you lift it, you see a thick layer of fine silt at the bottom, a miniature Tiber River bed in your drink. This is the wine of the people, the fuel of the legions, the social lubricant of the empire. And it is profoundly, deeply hazy. Scholars and food historians still debate just how palatable Roman wine would be to a modern drinker. And contemplating the cup in front of you, you can understand why. The taste is challenging. It's sharp, acidic, and carries a strange, resinous tang on the finish. That pine-like flavor is a signature of the era, a direct result of how the wine was stored. The iconic Roman amphorae, those tall clay jars you see in museums, were essential for transporting and aging wine. To make them less porous, their interiors were coated with pine pitch or resin. This mainstream practice made the vessels waterproof, but also unavoidably infused the wine with a strong, turpentine-like flavor. To a Roman, this taste was simply the taste of wine. To you, it's like licking a tree. But the murkiness isn't just from yeast and tannins. The Romans were notorious for doctoring their wines, adding a whole host of ingredients for flavor, preservation, or sweetness. This is where things get particularly quirky. The most common sweetener was a syrup called sapa or defrutum, made by slowly boiling down grape juice. The crucial detail, however, is that this was often done in lead pots. The process created lead acetate, a compound also known as sugar of lead, which is incredibly sweet, but also fantastically toxic. Your average Roman was unknowingly microdosing with a neurotoxin every time they wanted to sweeten their drink. The phrase killer wine might have been a bit more literal back then. As if that weren't enough, some Roman recipes called for the addition of seawater. Vintners would collect it from the deep ocean, believing it had preservative qualities and added a desirable savory complexity. Imagine a winemaker today proudly presenting their new Oyster Bay and Lead vintage. You swirl the gritty liquid in your cup, a strange cocktail of fermented grape juice, pine resin, lead syrup, and salt water. The challenge of clarifying such a concoction is staggering. You can see now why the fining methods we explored earlier, the delicate additions of egg whites or milk, were the exclusive domain of the ultra-wealthy. You wouldn't waste your precious eggs trying to pretty up this common table wine. It was a cheap, functional beverage, destined to be mixed with water to make it drinkable, a practice that was considered the mark of a civilized man. Drinking wine, undiluted, was seen as the habit of barbarians. Here, in the noisy, smoky heart of a Roman papina, the dream of a perfectly clear drink seems like a distant, aristocratic fantasy. Clarity is not the concern of the common man. His concern is that the wine is cheap, wet, and strong enough to wash away the dust of the day. For all its architectural and engineering genius, its aqueducts that carried pristine water for miles, its perfectly straight roads, the Roman Empire could not, or perhaps simply did not care to, solve the problem of the cloudy cup for the masses. The techniques existed, but they were a form of art, not industry. The great machine of empire would eventually crumble, and with it, the specific tastes and traditions of its taverns. The quest for clarity would be put on hold, the world plunging into a period where survival, not beverage aesthetics, was the priority. The secrets of the cellar would lie dormant, waiting to be rediscovered by a new institution, one with the time, the patience, and a very different reason for wanting a pure and perfect drink. The noisy Roman tavern fades into a distant memory, a ghost of a fallen empire. Your journey takes you forward through time, through the chaotic centuries of upheaval that followed. The world has fractured, but in quiet, secluded pockets, the embers of knowledge are kept alive. You find yourself standing in the cool, echoing silence of a medieval monastery. Light streams in through high, arched windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the still air. The only sounds are the distant, melodic drone of Gregorian chant and the soft scuff of woolen robes on stone floors. The air smells of beeswax, old parchment, and a faint, sweet, bready aroma of fermentation. Here, in these bastions of order and contemplation, the quest for a clear drink is taken up once more, but with a profoundly different motivation. After Rome's collapse, the organized, large-scale production of wine and beer fell into disarray. It was within these cloistered walls that the techniques were preserved, copied from old texts and painstakingly refined. The monks, particularly of the Benedictine and Cistercian orders, became the master brewers of the age. This wasn't a hobby, it was an integral part of their existence. Beer was a crucial source of nutrition, a liquid bread that could sustain a brother through the long, arduous fasts of Lent. The rule of Saint Benedict, the very constitution for many monastic communities, even allotted a daily hemina, or pint, of drink for each monk. They brewed for themselves, for the steady stream of pilgrims seeking shelter, and as a vital source of income, selling their surplus to nearby villages. For these men, however, brewing was more than just a chore or a business. It was an act of faith. You watch a monk, his face serene and focused as he stirs a massive wooden mash tun. His movements are slow, deliberate, and practiced. To him, this work is a prayer. The concept of purity was central to their worldview. Just as they sought to purify their souls for God, they sought to purify their creations. A cloudy, flawed, off-tasting ale was an imperfect offering, a poor reflection of the perfection of God's creation. A clear, bright, beautiful ale, on the other hand, was a tribute, a small, earthly manifestation of divine order and harmony. It was a clearer connection to God through a clearer drink. You can almost imagine them being the original craft beer snobs, frowning at a cloudy pint not because it was trendy, but because it was theologically unsound. Historians debate the true motivation behind this monastic drive for quality. Was it a form of worship, a desire to create a perfect offering to God? Or was it simply good business, a way to ensure their product was superior to secular offerings, thus guaranteeing a steady income for the abbey? In all likelihood, the two were intertwined, a holy marriage of piety and pragmatism. A reputation for excellent ale brought in more pilgrims and more coin, which in turn funded the monastery's sacred mission. Their pursuit, however, was still hampered by the technology of the day. Before the widespread adoption of hops, beer was flavored and preserved with a proprietary blend of herbs and botanicals known as gruit. You see a monk at a stone table, carefully grinding bog myrtle, yarrow, and other herbs for the brew kettle. This quirky, forgotten ingredient added its own unique character to the beer, and its own unique particulate matter to the haze. Some of the herbs in these blends were known to have mild psychoactive properties, which might have made evening vespers a much more vivid and spiritual experience than usual. The monks' greatest assets were patience and meticulousness. They had time. They could allow their brews to sit in cool cellars for weeks or months, a process we would now call lagering, letting gravity do the slow, gentle work of clarification. They became masters of carefully racking the cleared beer off the sediment, siphoning it from one cask to another with minimal disturbance. And yes, if the abbey's finances and chicken flock allowed, they might use the old Roman trick of adding egg whites. Their methods were a refinement of existing knowledge, not a revolution. You picture the brewmaster monk, the cellarer, holding a polished horn beaker up to a flickering candlelight, his brow furrowed as he inspects the color and clarity. If a visiting bishop were served a cloudy pint, the resulting penance might involve a lot of silent, passive-aggressive floor scrubbing. They brought brewing from a chaotic art to a disciplined craft. They proved that a consistently clearer, better-tasting beer was possible through care and dedication. But the world outside the monastery walls was beginning to stir. The Dark Ages were waning, and towns and cities were growing. A new merchant class was rising, and with them, a commercial demand for beer on a scale the monks could never match. These new secular brewers shared the monks' desire for a quality product, but they did not share their infinite patience. They needed a method of clarification that was fast, reliable, and cheap. The slow, prayerful methods of the cloister wouldn't survive in the bustling, competitive marketplace. The stage was set for a new discovery, an ingredient that could force clarity upon a brew, not just coax it out with prayer and time. The patient, prayerful work of the monks fades into the background, a gentle echo in the stone corridors of history. Your search for that fast, reliable, and scalable solution to the age-old problem of cloudy drink pulls you away from the burgeoning towns of Western Europe. You journey eastward, following the slow, winding trade routes that lead into the vast, wilder expanses of the continent. The manicured fields and orderly villages give way to immense forests and sprawling wetlands, lands carved by great, slumbering rivers that seem as old as time itself. You find yourself standing on the muddy bank of one such river, perhaps the mighty Danube or the endless Volga. The water is wide, brown, and slow-moving, its surface like polished pewter under a gray sky. Vast beds of reeds sigh in the wind. There is a sense of profound, ancient quiet here, a stillness that feels a world away from the concerns of commerce and craft. It is in these murky, primordial waters that the solution lies, and it lives inside a creature as ancient as the river itself. You see a local fisherman haul a massive shape from the depths, a creature so bizarre it seems to have swum right out of the fossil record. This is the sturgeon. It is not a fish you recognize from a gentle stream or a placid lake. It is a river monster, a living relic from the age of dinosaurs. Its body is not covered in familiar, shimmering scales, but in 5 rows of hard, bony plates called scutes, a kind of reptilian armor. Its tail is asymmetrical, like a shark's, and its long, shovel-like snout is equipped with 4 sensitive, whisker-like barbels that trail along the river bottom, feeling for food. It has no teeth. Instead, its mouth is a strange, fleshy, vacuum-like tube that it can extend to slurp up mollusks, crustaceans, and worms from the mud. The whole creature looks like it was designed by a committee of medieval map-makers trying to illustrate "Here be dragons." This strange primeval beast has been swimming in the rivers and seas of the northern hemisphere for over 200 million years. It is a true living fossil, a direct swimming link to a world we can barely imagine. For as long as people have lived on these riverbanks, they have hunted the sturgeon. It was and still is prized for 2 things above all else: its dense, meaty, almost boneless flesh, and its precious pearlescent eggs, which when salted become one of the world's greatest delicacies, caviar. From the Caspian Sea to the rivers of Russia, the sturgeon was a source of immense wealth, a swimming treasure chest that promised sustenance and luxury. But the secret you are looking for lies in a third, much less glamorous part of the fish. You watch as the fisherman expertly butchers his catch on the riverbank. He removes the fillets of meat and carefully scoops out the precious roe. The rest of the offal would typically be discarded, but he pauses and, with a practiced hand, extracts a single, large organ. It is a long, opaque, bladder-like sac that runs along the fish's spine. This is the swim bladder, or sound, An organ the fish inflates or deflates with gas to control its buoyancy, allowing it to rise and fall in the water column like a submarine adjusting its ballast tanks. Just how this discovery was first made is lost to history, a point of quiet speculation among food historians. Perhaps it was a fisherman's wife, looking for a strong substance to make glue or patch a container, who first realized the unique properties of this organ. When the swim bladder is removed, split open, washed, and dried in the sun, it transforms into a stiff, semi-translucent sheet of a material that is almost pure collagen. It is incredibly tough and when dissolved in water creates a powerful sticky adhesive. You can almost picture the forgotten moment of genius. Someone, somewhere, somehow made the leap from "this stuff makes great glue" to "I wonder what this would do in my cloudy beer." It might have been the greatest hold my ale and watch this moment in the entire history of food science. The connection is so wonderfully bizarre it is like discovering a component of your car's engine also happens to make the perfect cheesecake. This is the source. This strange, dried membrane, harvested from an armored river monster from the wild frontiers of Eastern Europe, is the key. It holds a clarifying power far beyond that of egg whites or clay. It is the raw material for the substance that will come to be known as isinglass. The secret is out of the water, but its journey has just begun. Now this humble, fishy byproduct must be processed, traded, and transported hundreds of miles to the west, where anxious brewers are waiting for a miracle. The creature has been identified, the source of the miracle located. Now your journey takes you to the heart of its domain. You are standing on the shores of the Caspian Sea, where the mighty Volga River finally relinquishes its long journey and splinters into a vast marshy delta. This is not a picturesque sandy beach. It is a flat, endless landscape of mud, reeds, and brackish water, a place where the line between land and sea is constantly blurred. The air is heavy with the smell of salt and silt, of drying nets and damp earth. In the distance, you hear the lonely cry of a gull. This is the ancient homeland of the sturgeon, and for centuries it has been the undisputed center of the world for those who hunt it. You find yourself in a small, weathered fishing settlement. The buildings are made of rough-hewn wood, grayed by the sun and the salty air. Life here is not easy. It is dictated by the rhythms of the river and the sea, and by the biannual migration of the great fish. Archaeologists and historians continue to debate the exact timeline, but evidence of sturgeon fishing in this region dates back thousands of years, suggesting a long, slow evolution from subsistence fishing to a large-scale commercial enterprise. By the time our story has reached the late medieval period, this is a well-established if arduous industry. Before dawn, you join a group of fishermen as they push their sturdy wooden boat, a lodka, out into the labyrinthine channels of the delta. The water is cold and murky. The work is punishing. They use massive nets, hundreds of feet long, that they painstakingly set across the channels, anchoring them with heavy stones. They build intricate weirs, fence-like traps designed to funnel the migrating fish into an enclosed area. This is not your granddad's quiet Sunday afternoon hoping for a bite. This is heavy, industrial work, a battle of attrition against a powerful foe. A fully grown beluga sturgeon, the most prized species, can reach lengths of over 15 feet and weigh more than 2,000 pounds. When one of these leviathans hits a net, it's like trying to stop a runaway train. The men strain, their muscles taut, their faces grim with concentration as they fight to haul the thrashing, prehistoric giant aboard. In some of the more remote settlements, you witness a truly quirky and remarkable tradition. The fishermen here have formed an unlikely partnership with a local predator, the Caspian seal, or nirpa. These seals, which also prey on sturgeon, have been trained to act as fish herders. They dive deep into the river's holes, chasing the massive sturgeon out from their hiding places and driving them towards the waiting nets. It's a stunning display of ingenuity and interspecies cooperation, a practice born from generations of close observation of the natural world. It's the ancient equivalent of training a lion to help you with your hunt, a wild and beautiful secret of the Caspian. Back on the shore, the day's catch is processed with a practiced, almost ritualistic efficiency. The main prize, the black gold of the Caspian, is the caviar. You watch as a fisherman makes a long, clean incision and removes the massive skeins of roe. The eggs are carefully sieved, washed and salted by a master processor, a man whose entire life has been dedicated to this single delicate task. This is what drives the whole endeavor. This is the product destined for the tables of czars and kings. But you are here for the byproduct. As the great fish is butchered for its meat, the swim bladder is removed. To the fisherman, it's a secondary concern, the weird balloon thingy, but a valuable one nonetheless. It's set aside, destined for a different fate than the meat or the roe. You see them laid out on long wooden racks under the pale sun. Dozens, then hundreds of these strange membranous sacks. They are washed of any remaining blood or tissue and left to dry in the stiff breeze blowing off the sea. Slowly, they transform from a soft, pliable organ into hard, semi-transparent sheets. This is the very first step in the long, sleepy process of creating isinglass. The glimmering prize of the Caspian is not just its famous caviar, but this humble, stiffening membrane. Here, on this remote, muddy shore, the arduous, muscle-straining work of the fisherman provides the raw material for a delicate and transformative process that will take place hundreds of miles away. The journey of this fishy treasure has just begun. You walk away from the bustle of the boats and over to the long wooden racks where the catch's humble byproduct is left to the sun and the wind. You reach out and take one of the dried swim bladders in your hand. It is no longer a soft, pliable organ. It is a stiff, surprisingly light object, a sheet of hard, fibrous material that feels like a cross between raw parchment and unpolished amber. It is semi-translucent, and holding it up to the pale light, you can see the dense network of fibers woven within it. You run a thumb over its surface. It's smooth in some places, rough and ridged in others. It has a faint, clean, oceanic smell, the ghost of the inland sea it came from. This unassuming object, looking more like a piece of natural plastic than anything organic, holds the secret to solving a problem that has vexed brewers for thousands of years. This material has a name that is as misleading as it is beautiful: Isinglass. The name conjures images of shimmering ice or perfectly clear glass, which is fitting for a substance used to create clarity. But the word itself has nothing to do with either. It is a wonderfully quirky piece of linguistic history, a name that has been warped by centuries of trade and translation. The original term comes from the Dutch Huizenblas, or its German cousin Hausenblase. Hausen was a common name for the great beluga sturgeon, and blas or blase simply means bladder. So Huizenblas literally translates to sturgeon bladder. Over time, as this product made its way to England, the foreign-sounding name was anglicized, smoothed out by tongues unfamiliar with its origins until it became the more poetic Isinglass. It's a perfect example of a historical game of telephone, where the original, bluntly descriptive name was slowly polished into something much more elegant and mysterious. So, what is this thing you are holding from a biological standpoint? In the living sturgeon, this bladder is a marvel of natural engineering. It is the fish's buoyancy compensator. By gulping air at the surface or releasing gas from its blood, the sturgeon can inflate or deflate this internal balloon, allowing it to maintain a specific depth in the water with minimal effort. But its true magic lies in its composition. The reason it's so incredibly tough and uniquely useful is that the walls of this sac are made of one protein above all others: collagen. And not just any collagen. This is one of the purest, most concentrated natural sources of type 1 collagen found anywhere in the animal kingdom. You've probably heard of collagen today. It's in face creams, dietary supplements, and health drinks, praised as the fountain of youth. Here in your hand is its most raw and industrial ancestor. Collagen is the great building block of animal life, the primary structural protein that forms the scaffolding for skin, bones, tendons, and all connective tissues. Its molecules are like long, incredibly strong ropes, woven together to provide strength and flexibility. The swim bladder is essentially a perfectly tailored, densely woven mat of these collagen ropes, which is why it is so formidably strong when dried. But here is where the deeper mystery lies. Collagen is common. Gelatin, for example, is just collagen extracted from the skin and bones of mammals. So why was isinglass, this specific fish bladder collagen, so much more effective at clarifying beer and wine than common gelatin? Biochemists still debate the precise molecular coiling and electrostatic interactions that give isinglass its uniquely effective fining properties compared to other forms of collagen. The answer seems to be that the specific structure of this collagen, once dissolved, carries a powerful positive electrical charge. This makes it a supermagnet for the yeast cells and protein molecules that cause haze, which are typically negatively charged. It doesn't just bump into them, it actively, powerfully attracts them, forming large, heavy clumps that sink quickly and completely. Common gelatin works, but isinglass is in another league entirely. Back at the fishery, the dried bladders, now properly called purses, are sorted by size, color, and quality. The largest, palest, and cleanest ones fetch the highest price. They are then tightly rolled into scrolls or folded into compact stacks, tied with twine and packed into crates. They no longer resemble a piece of a fish at all. They look like ancient documents or perhaps rolls of fine leather, ready for a long journey. The biological oddity has been transformed into a stable, valuable commodity. The power of its molecules is locked away, dormant, waiting to be unleashed in a dark, cool brewery cellar 1,000 miles to the west. The stiff, parchment-like scroll in your hand is no longer just a biological curiosity. It is a commodity. It has been harvested, processed, and packed. Now, it must travel. Your perspective pulls back from the Caspian shore, and you see not just one scroll, but thousands packed into rough wooden crates. These crates are at the very beginning of a long, slow, and tightly controlled journey that will take them from this remote edge of the world into the very heart of brewing in Western Europe. For centuries, the story of Isinglass is inseparable from the story of Russian trade, because the czars and merchants of Muscovy sat atop a formidable monopoly. By controlling the vast river systems of the Volga, the Don, and the Urals, they controlled the world's primary habitats for the sturgeon. And by controlling the fish, they controlled the global supply of the finest isinglass. For a brewer in London, a vintner in Bordeaux, or a craftsman in Amsterdam, there was simply nowhere else to turn. If you wanted the best quality, most effective clarifying agent, you had to buy Russian. This wasn't quite the OPEC of fish bladders, but it wasn't far off. This monopoly gave the Russian trading houses immense power to set prices, creating a supply chain that was as lucrative as it was arduous. You now follow one of those crates as it begins its sleepy northward odyssey. The first leg of the journey is by water. The crate is loaded onto a shallow draft river barge, a simple, flat-bottomed boat designed to navigate the great internal waterway of Russia, the Volga River. The journey is upstream, a slow, tedious crawl against the current. You drift for weeks through a seemingly endless landscape of flat steppe and dense forest. You pass small, smoky villages and the golden onion domes of distant churches. The only sounds are the rhythmic splash of poles in the water, the creak of the barge's timbers, and the shouts of the rivermen as they haul the boat from the banks with thick ropes, their bodies straining. The Isinglass sits in the dark hold, an inert passenger on a journey that measures progress by inches per hour. After hundreds of miles, the river journey ends. This is where the truly quirky and inefficient genius of medieval logistics comes into play. The cargo must cross the watershed that separates the river basins of the south from those that flow north to the Arctic Ocean. The crates of Isinglass are unloaded by weary laborers and transferred to horse-drawn carts. You now follow the convoy as it trundles overland on rough, muddy tracks that are barely roads at all. This is the portage, a grueling, bone-jarring trek that could take weeks. In the winter, the carts are replaced by sleds, gliding more smoothly over the frozen landscape. The precious, brittle scrolls are jostled and bumped, their value increasing with every difficult mile covered. Eventually, you reach another river, this time one that flows north like the northern Dvina. The cargo is loaded back onto barges, and the journey by water resumes, this time downstream, carried by the current towards the sea. This convoluted route, up a river, across a wide stretch of land and down another river, was the only way to transport goods from the landlocked interior to a port accessible by the merchant fleets of Western Europe. The isinglass that finally reaches its destination has seen more of the vast, wild Russian landscape than most of the people who lived there. Your journey ends for now in a bustling seasonal port town like Arkhangelsk, Archangel in English on the shores of the White Sea. Here, English and Dutch ships wait in the harbor, their crews eager to trade wool and finished goods for the riches of Russia. Furs, timber, wax, and of course the precious scrolls of Isinglass. The crates are opened, and the product is inspected by discerning merchants. Economic historians still debate the full extent to which the Russian state actively manipulated the Isinglass market, or if the high prices were simply a natural result of the immense distances and difficulties involved in the trade. Watching the process, you suspect it's a bit of both. The journey alone justifies a high cost, not unlike the shock of seeing the shipping fees for a small item you ordered online from halfway across the world. But the Russian merchants, knowing they have a captive market, surely added a healthy premium for their trouble. Finally, a crate of the finest astrakhan leaf is sold, its price many times what it was worth back on the Caspian shore. It is carefully rowed out to a sturdy English carrack and lowered into the hold. The fish bladder has finished its long internal journey through Russia. It is now leaving its homeland, crossing the cold waters of the Barents Sea, destined for a new world of commerce, industry, and a new, much sleepier purpose. The English ship, heavy with its cargo from the north, navigates the bustling, chaotic waters of the River Thames. It finally comes to rest at a crowded London dock, a forest of masts and rigging under a sky perpetually hazy with coal smoke. The crate you have been following on its long transcontinental journey is hoisted from the hold by a groaning crane and lowered onto the damp, slick cobblestones of the wharf. Its epic voyage is over, but its transformation is not quite complete. You follow the crate as it is loaded onto a cart and rumbles through the narrow, noisy streets of the city, finally arriving at a small, unassuming workshop tucked away in a back alley. You step inside, and the air is immediately thick with a strange, unique smell. It's not just fishy, it's a dry, dusty, oceanic scent mixed with the aroma of damp parchment and a hint of something like glue. This is the workshop of an Isinglass cutter, a member of a small, specialized, and all but forgotten trade. Bundles of the raw Russian Isinglass, the hard, amber-colored scrolls you last saw being loaded in Arkhangelsk, are stacked in the corners. The tools of the trade are simple: heavy oak tables, incredibly sharp knives, wooden mallets, and large, water-filled tubs. The raw scroll, as it arrives from Russia, is a tough, unrefined material. It's too brittle and impure for a brewer to use directly. Here, in this dusty workshop, it undergoes its final, painstaking refinement. You watch as a cutter takes one of the scrolls and submerges it in a tub of cool water. It sits there, slowly, stubbornly absorbing the moisture, relinquishing the hardness it gained on the Caspian shore. After several hours, the stiff sheet becomes pliable and leathery once more. The now softened sheet is laid out on a cutting table. With a practiced eye and a razor-sharp blade, the cutter begins to meticulously scrape and trim the isinglass. He is removing the last vestiges of the fish's internal membranes, any tiny specks of dried blood, or other impurities that were missed by the fishermen thousands of miles away. It is slow, focused, delicate work. The goal is to produce a sheet of the purest possible collagen, as any foreign matter could spoil a batch of beer. These cutters were probably not the biggest fans of fish for supper. Next comes the most laborious part of the process. The cleaned, damp sheets are moved to a heavy block and beaten with wooden mallets. The rhythmic, thudding sound echoes in the small workshop. This mechanical action begins to break down the dense, fibrous structure of the bladder. The beaten sheets are then fed through a set of heavy hand-cranked rollers, much like an old laundry wringer. The immense pressure flattens the collagen into incredibly thin, uniform, almost translucent sheets. The smell of damp, fishy protein intensifies. This is not a job for the faint of heart or for those with a sensitive nose. Finally, the thin, damp, processed sheets are ready for the last step. Depending on the needs of the customer, the master cutter will take his blade and either slice the sheets into neat, wafer-like rectangles, known as leaf isinglass, or feed them into a machine that shreds them into fine, thread-like filaments, sold as purse isinglass. London in the 18th and 19th centuries became the global center for this kind of specialized processing, importing the raw material from Russia and transforming it into a high-quality, finished product for brewers at home and abroad. Historians and artisans still debate the subtle, almost lost techniques these isinglass cutters used, and whether their manual processing imparted a special quality to the findings that was lost in later, more mechanized methods. You watch as the finished product, a box of delicate paper-thin leaves or a bag of fine pale shreds, is neatly packaged. It bears no resemblance to the tough, rustic scroll that arrived at the docks. This is a refined, manufactured article of commerce. The Isinglass cutter is like a master coffee roaster, taking a raw green bean from a distant land and, through their own skill and craft, preparing it perfectly for the final user. The journey is complete. The material is ready for its ultimate sleepy purpose just a short cart ride away, in the cool, dark cellar of a London brewery. You leave the dusty, fish-scented air of the cutter's workshop and take another step back from the physical object. You move from the world of manual craft to the quiet, cerebral world of commerce that underpins it all. You are no longer a laborer, but a clerk in a London counting house sometime in the late 17th century. Your world is a small, wood-paneled room, illuminated by the soft, flickering light of a tallow candle and the gray afternoon light filtering through a leaded glass window. The air smells of beeswax, old paper, and the sharp, metallic tang of iron gall ink. The only sounds are the gentle ticking of a tall case clock in the corner, the distant, muted rumble of carts on the street below, and the rhythmic, whispery scratch of your own quill pen as it moves across the page. Your domain is a massive leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat, spidery columns of figures and script. Your job is one of painstaking, sleepy precision. You are the accountant, the silent historian of this strange and lucrative trade. A new shipment has arrived from the port of Arkhangelsk, and it is your duty to record its contents, its cost, and its eventual fate. You dip the tip of your goose feather quill into the ink pot, a small act of intense concentration. The most exciting part of your day is successfully not spilling it. You carefully begin to write, your hand moving in a graceful practice dance. The entry logs the arrival of the raw Isinglass, and as you write, you detail the various grades and types, their names sounding more like something from a wizard's storeroom than a fish merchant's inventory. You write, 15 bales, Astrakhan leaf, first sort, noting its high quality and price. Then, 20 crates, Siberian purse, common, a cheaper, shredded form destined for less discerning brewers. You might even log a small parcel of book Isinglass, a type where the membranes were folded together like the pages of a book. These poetic-sounding names were the industry shorthand for the product's origin, form, and purity, a lexicon understood by every merchant in the trade from Moscow to London. The company you work for is a member of the powerful and influential Muscovy Company, an English trading firm that was granted a royal charter way back in 1555. This charter gave them a near-total monopoly on trade between England and the Russian territories. Every crate of isinglass you log, every barrel of whale oil, every bundle of fine sable fur, is part of this vast, officially sanctioned enterprise. Your meticulous record-keeping isn't just for the company's partners. It's a matter of state, tracking the flow of goods, and the all-important customs duties owed to the crown. The numbers in your ledger tell a slow, quiet story of global economics. You tally the initial purchase price in Russian rubles, the cost of shipping across the treacherous northern seas, the wages for the sailors, the fees for the isinglass cutter who will refine the raw material. Then you calculate the price at which it will be sold to the city's brewers, and finally, the tidy profit margin. You are, in a very real sense, at the financial nerve center of it all, translating a physical object, a dried fish bladder, into the abstract language of pounds, shillings, and pence. Your vellum ledger is a 17th century spreadsheet, and your quill is your mouse clicking through the data of a volatile, ancient commodity. But your ledger doesn't tell the whole story. You hear the whispers from the docks and the taverns, tales of interlopers and smugglers who try to circumvent the Muscovy Company's monopoly. Just how much isinglass was being unofficially smuggled to avoid the high tariffs and company monopolies is a question that still keeps maritime historians pleasantly occupied, fueling quiet debates in sleepy academic journals. Perhaps a ship captain declares 10 crates but has an 11th hidden away, a little private enterprise to boost his profits. This is the shadow economy that exists just beyond the neat columns of your official record. As the afternoon light begins to fail, you finish your entries for the day. You carefully blot the wet ink with a shaker of fine sand, Close the heavy cover of the ledger and extinguish your candle. Your role in this long journey is complete. The fish bladder has been caught, dried, processed, shipped across a continent, refined by a specialist, and now its value has been formally entered into the economic record. Every slow, methodical step has been accounted for. The Isinglass now sits in a London warehouse, a fully paid-for, legal, and very expensive commodity, ready for its final and most important task. The heavy ledger closes, and with it the chapter on commerce and trade. The Isinglass, now a fully accounted-for commodity, waits in a London warehouse. Before you follow it on its final short journey to a brewery, you must take one last detour. This journey is not through space or time, but into the invisible molecular world within a cask of hazy beer. To truly understand the sleepy magic of Isinglass, you have to understand the sleepy science that makes it work. It is a tale of opposite charges, of silent, inexorable attraction. First, you must understand the problem on its own terms. The haze in an unfinished beer or wine is what scientists call a colloidal suspension. This is a wonderfully quirky and technical way of saying that the millions of tiny yeast cells and protein molecules floating in the liquid are perfectly happy where they are. They are so small and light that the constant random jostling of the water molecules around them is more than enough to counteract the gentle pull of gravity. They are like microscopic dust motes in a sunbeam, destined to dance in suspension forever. Left to its own devices, a beer might take months to clear, if it ever clears at all. The particles are in a state of stable, stubborn equilibrium. The secret to this stability lies in a fundamental force of nature, electromagnetism. In the slightly acidic environment of beer or wine, each individual yeast cell develops a net negative electrical charge on its outer wall. You can picture each tiny particle surrounded by a little force field of negative energy. And just like the negative poles of two magnets, these yeast cells actively push each other away. They are a massive crowd of antisocial introverts, each one demanding its personal space, refusing to clump together. This mutual repulsion is the key reason the haze is so stable. Now, you introduce the Isinglass. As you've learned, Isinglass is a remarkably pure form of the protein collagen. When the brewer prepares the Isinglass for use, they dissolve it in a mild acid solution. As the long, rope-like collagen molecules unwind and dissolve, they undergo the opposite transformation to the yeast. They acquire a strong positive electrical charge. You now have your two opposing forces: a hazy beer full of tiny, free-floating negative particles and a solution of long, stringy, positively charged molecules. The stage is set for a slow, silent, and inevitable molecular ballet. When the Isinglass solution is added to the beer, the long, positively charged collagen molecules begin to drift through the brew. They are like slow-moving, sticky strands of molecular fishing line. The small, negatively charged yeast cells, which were so determined to keep their distance from one another, find the positive charge of the collagen utterly irresistible. The force of attraction is far stronger than the force of repulsion. One by one, the yeast cells and other hazy proteins are drawn in and stick to the surface of the collagen molecule. The collagen acts as a bridge, a gathering point, neutralizing the negative charges and allowing the particles to come together. More and more particles stick to the growing chain, forming a larger and larger aggregate. This process of clumping is called flocculation. To this day, scientists offer competing models to explain the exact formation of the flocculent structure, whether it's more like a net that physically sweeps up particles as it falls, or a multi-particle chain reaction, where the collagen acts as a nucleus for a growing crystal of gunk. Either way, the result is the same. The once tiny, lightweight particles are now bound together into a much larger, heavier, and spongier mass. It is the molecular equivalent of using a lint roller on a dusty coat. The sticky roller is the collagen, and the dust is the yeast. This new large clump, or flock, is now finally dense enough and heavy enough for gravity to take over. The random jostling of water molecules is no longer enough to keep it suspended. The silent, invisible dance of attraction is over. The slow, inevitable fall can begin. All this microscopic drama, this silent play of positive and negative forces, is for one profoundly undramatic purpose: to make things settle. The theory is now understood. The next step is to see it in practice in the cool, damp reality of a brewer's cellar. The abstract world of charged molecules dissolves, and you find yourself coalescing in a cool, dark, and very real place. You are in a brewery cellar in 18th century London. The air is thick and damp, heavy with the earthy smell of wet stone, the sweet, bready aroma of fermentation, and the faint, vinegary tang of old beer mingling with the scent of soaked wood. The only light comes from a single smoky lantern, its yellow glow catching on the curved surfaces of massive wooden casks that line the walls, disappearing into the deep shadows. The only sounds are the slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the vaulted brick ceiling and the gentle, almost imperceptible hiss of yeast still sleepily at work. This is a quiet subterranean world, a place of profound patience. You are with the cellarman, a man whose movements are as slow and deliberate as the processes he oversees. He is the guardian of the finished beer, and his most delicate task is now at hand. In a quiet corner of the cellar, he has a dedicated piece of equipment, a small wooden vat about the size of a barrel, known as a fining tub. This is his workbench. He takes the package of finely shredded isinglass you last saw in the cutter's workshop, its pale, almost weightless contents seeming to glow in the lantern light. Now he needs a solvent, but he doesn't reach for a bucket of fresh water. Instead, he takes a small pail to one of the giant casks and, using a spile and mallet, draws off a few gallons of beer. But this is not the fresh, young beer he intends to clarify. This is old beer, beer that has been sitting for a while, developing a distinct, sharp sourness. This is the crucial mainstream technique passed down through generations of brewers. The incredibly pure collagen of the isinglass needs a properly acidic environment to break down and dissolve, to uncoil its long molecules and activate their powerful positive charge. The lactic and acetic acids in the old sour beer provide the perfect medium. It was a closed-loop system of beautiful, practical efficiency. The cellarman pours the sour beer into his fining tub. Then he adds the dry, brittle shreds of isinglass. He stirs it all gently with a long wooden paddle, and then he waits. This is not a process that can be rushed. It is the very definition of a slow, sleepy transformation. You watch as the hard shreds of isinglass slowly, stubbornly, begin to absorb the liquid. They soften, swell, and lose their distinct shape, gradually breaking down. It's like watching a ghost materialize in reverse. The cellarman returns periodically to give the mixture another gentle, languid stir. It's the original, some assembly required product, but the instructions are just add sour beer and wait. Brewing historians still debate the exact recipes for these fining solutions, as they were often closely guarded trade secrets that varied significantly from one brewery to another. The cellarman in front of you might have his own secret ingredient, a pinch of salt to aid the process, or a specific blend of old ales he swears by. The ratio of isinglass to beer, the temperature of the cellar, the number of hours or days he lets it sit, all of these were variables in an unwritten equation, an art form learned through years of trial, error, and quiet observation. A brewer's method for cutting his finings was as proprietary as a baker's sourdough starter, or a modern chef's secret sauce recipe. After a day or two, the transformation is complete. The mixture in the tub is no longer beer with bits in it. It is a new substance known simply as finings. You look into the tub. It's a thick, gloopy, pale, and gelatinous liquid, something like a thin, cloudy porridge. It has a sharp vinegary smell from the sour beer, with a faint underlying hint of the ocean. It does not look appetizing. In fact, it looks like something you'd pay your friend a shilling to drink as a dare. But this strange, viscous slurry is the refined, activated, and fully weaponized form of the isinglass. The cellarman dips his paddle in, lifts it, and watches the thick liquid drip slowly back into the tub, his experienced eye judging its consistency. He gives a slow, satisfied nod. The magical potion is ready. The next step is to introduce it to the slumbering, hazy beer waiting in the great casks. The cellarman straightens his back, his work in the fining tub complete. He lifts the heavy wooden bucket, now filled with the thick, pale, and potent fining solution. His footsteps echo softly in the damp silence as he carries it from his corner over to one of the great wooden casks that stands like a silent sentinel in the gloom. Inside this particular cask are hundreds of gallons of young, fresh, and thoroughly hazy ale. It has finished its primary fermentation, and now it slumbers, a cloudy soup of potential. The cellarman's task is now one of almost surgical delicacy. He must introduce the finings into this massive volume of liquid so that it is perfectly and evenly distributed, all without waking the slumbering brew. This is the gentle art of rousing. It is a process fraught with peril. If he stirs too vigorously, he will introduce oxygen into the cask, a kiss of death that will lead to stale, papery off flavors. If he plunges his tool too deep, he will disturb the thick layer of yeast and protein sediment, the trub, that is already naturally settled at the bottom, kicking it back up into suspension and making the beer even cloudier than when he started. But if he doesn't stir enough, the finings will be poorly distributed, creating pockets of clear beer while leaving other parts stubbornly hazy. It was a nerve-wracking procedure. One clumsy move could ruin the entire cask, and you'd have to be the one to explain to the master brewer how you ruined a month's profit with a big stick. He selects his tool, which leans against the wall nearby. It's a long pole of smooth, worn ash, longer than he is tall. On the end is a simple wooden grid, a small lattice that helps with agitation. This is a rouser, a purpose-built implement for this single, specific job. He approaches the cask, unplugs the central bunghole, and a soft hiss of trapped carbon dioxide escapes, carrying with it the sweet, fruity aroma of the young ale. With a steady hand, he pours the entire bucket of the gloopy fining solution into the opening. You watch it disappear with a thick, viscous glug into the darkness of the cask. Now the art begins. He slides the long rouser into the cask. His movements are not the vigorous churning you might use to mix paint. They are slow, methodical, and incredibly gentle. He plunges the rouser downwards and then draws it upwards, a long, slow, vertical stroke. He is not stirring so much as folding, gently encouraging the thick finings to mix with the ale. It's the brewing equivalent of folding beaten egg whites into a delicate cake batter. The goal is to incorporate, not to deflate. You notice his movements are not random. He follows a specific, practiced pattern. Brewing historians and historical reenactors often debate the precise amount of agitation required, as too little would result in uneven clearing, while too much would ruin the beer's condition, creating what was known as fret or sickness. To combat this uncertainty, each brewery developed its own ritual. The cellarman before you might make 3 slow plunges on the left side, 3 on the right, and then a gentle figure 8 pattern in the middle. This quirky, almost superstitious routine was the brewery's intellectual property, a physical mnemonic passed down from master to apprentice, ensuring consistency and minimizing the risk of a costly error. It was a technique guided not by a manual, but by the subtle feel of the liquid's resistance against the rouser. After a few minutes of this slow, hypnotic motion, he stops. He knows, by instinct and experience, that the job is done. He slowly withdraws the rouser, its end coated in the now mixed ale and finings. He wipes it clean and carefully places it back in its designated spot. He takes a wooden bung, wraps it in a small piece of cloth, and hammers it firmly into the hole, sealing the cask completely. His work is finished. The most active part of the clarification process is now over. He has introduced the catalyst, distributed it perfectly, and sealed the beer away in the darkness. It is the 18th century equivalent of clicking save on a file that is a terabyte in size. The command has been given, but the processing will take time. All that is left to do now, for him and for you, is the hardest and sleepiest part of all: to wait. Inside the cask, the silent, invisible molecular ballet is just beginning. The cellarman's work is done and he departs, his footsteps fading as he ascends the stone steps back to the world of the living. You are left alone in the cool, profound silence of the cellar, the sole witness to the next and most sleepy phase of the process. Your only task now is to wait. There is nothing to do, nothing to see, nothing to measure. You simply exist in the stillness, a silent guardian of the slumbering casks. The air remains unchanged, a constant cool temperature. The damp, earthy, sweet smell is the same as it was an hour ago, and the same as it will be tomorrow. The lantern flame barely flickers. Time itself seems to slow down, to thicken, to become as viscous as the fining solution itself. Inside the massive wooden cask, the great slow settling has begun. You cannot see it, but you can imagine it from the science you now understand. The long, sticky molecules of collagen are performing their silent, magnetic dance, gathering up the lost souls of the yeast cells and stray proteins. They are forming the little clumps, the flock, which are now at this very moment beginning their long, graceful downward drift. It is not a rush, not a frantic plunge. It is a descent of almost unimaginable slowness, a microscopic, silent snowfall through a dark, beery universe. Millions of tiny particles, once held in stubborn suspension, have surrendered to the gentle, inexorable pull of gravity, aided by their new, heavy collagen companions. A day passes. Nothing has changed. The cask stands exactly as it did before. The cellarman might return for a moment, his boots crunching softly on the sandy floor. He places a hand on the side of the cask, perhaps feeling for a subtle change in temperature, or maybe just out of habit. He might take a small wooden peg, a spile, from a test hole in the cask's side, and let a tiny amount of beer dribble into a glass. He holds it to the lantern. It is still hazy, perhaps marginally less so, but the change is imperceptible. He replaces the spile and leaves. The wait continues. This is the perfect occupation for someone who finds watching paint dry to be a bit too fast-paced and action-packed. It is a process that makes a slow internet connection on a Sunday afternoon feel like a blistering race against time. Then after 2, maybe 3, long, uneventful days, the magic moment arrives. The cellarman returns and draws another sample. He holds the small glass to the lantern, and this time, something is different. The light doesn't just illuminate the liquid, it passes right through it. The beer is no longer a muddy, opaque soup. It is a brilliant, shining amber. This is the moment brewers for centuries have been waiting for, the milestone they called dropping bright. The beer has finally and completely clarified. The great slow snowfall inside the cask is over. The invisible work is done. What is left at the bottom is a thick, dense, gooey layer of sediment. This is the lees, also known as trub. It is a graveyard of sorts, a final resting place for the spent yeast, the unwanted proteins, and the isinglass that brought them all together. After the cellarman carefully siphons or racks the now crystal-clear beer from the top of the cask, this sludge remains. But even this was not wasted in the thrifty economy of the past. This yeast-rich slurry was often scooped out and sold to local pig farmers, who would mix it into their animals' feed. The pigs, in turn, were probably the happiest and sleepiest in the parish. The lees might also be sold to a vinegar works, its residual alcohol and yeast giving a powerful start to a new fermentation. As you gaze at the glass of brilliantly clear ale, a question arises. Does the isinglass affect the taste? Just how much flavor the isinglass itself imparted to the finished beer is a matter of some debate among brewing historians and modern-day traditionalists. Advocates have always argued that by removing the yeast and harsh, haze-forming proteins, it creates a cleaner, smoother, crisper flavor. It lets the pure taste of the malt and hops shine through. Detractors have sometimes wondered if a fish-based protein, no matter how pure, leaves some subtle, ghostly footprint on the palate, or if it strips away some desirable flavor compounds along with the bad. The long-standing success of the method suggests the effect was overwhelmingly positive, but the question of its absolute neutrality lingers like a sleepy, unprovable thought. The beer is now bright. It is ready. The isinglass has done its job, and the consequences of its silent, patient work will soon ripple out from this quiet cellar and change the way the world sees its drink. The quiet of the cellar is left behind. The journey of the isinglass is, for all intents and purposes, complete. Its purpose has been fulfilled. The now brilliantly clear beer is carefully racked from the great cask, leaving the lees behind, and is transferred into smaller barrels for delivery. You follow one such barrel as it's rolled out of the cellar, onto a dray cart, and rumbles over the cobblestones of London to its final destination. A public house. You step inside, out of the damp air, into a room filled with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the thick, sweet smell of pipe tobacco. And it is here, in the hands of the final consumer, that you witness the revolution that Isinglass helped create. For thousands of years, the appearance of beer hadn't mattered much. It was a thick, nutritious, opaque liquid, served in an opaque vessel, a pewter tankard, a ceramic stein, or a leather jack. You couldn't see into your drink, so its clarity was a purely academic concern. But in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, two technological shifts happened at once that changed everything. The first was the creation of pale malt. Brewers discovered that by using clean-burning coke instead of smoky wood to dry their malted barley, they could produce a grain that was light, golden, and free of smoky flavor. For the first time, they could brew a beer that was naturally pale, not brown. The second innovation was the growing availability of drinking glasses. As manufacturing techniques improved, clear glass vessels, once an unaffordable luxury, became increasingly common. Suddenly, the average pub-goer could hold their drink up to the light. The combination of these two developments created a revelatory moment. It was like television suddenly switching from black and white to color. For the first time, the drink itself was on display. Its color, its effervescence, and most importantly, its clarity. This created an immediate and immense pressure on brewers. A pale beer that was hazy looked awful. It looked like dirty dishwater. But a pale beer that was crystal clear, that shone in the light like liquid gold, looked clean, pure, and incredibly appetizing. The old cloudy aesthetic was dead. A new obsession with clarity was born. This is where Isinglass, our sleepy hero, steps out of the cellar and onto the main stage of brewing history. It was the crucial enabling technology that allowed brewers to reliably and quickly meet this new public demand. Without an effective fining agent, producing a consistently clear pale ale was a gamble. With Isinglass, it became a science. This new standard of perfection was given a name: bright. This quirky but elegant term became the official industry standard for a beer that was perfectly clear and ready to serve. A publican could send back a cask if the beer wasn't bright. It was the new benchmark for quality, a single word that encompassed this entire aesthetic shift. Beer historians argue endlessly about the exact origin of the first true pale ale, with competing claims from Burton-on-Trent, whose mineral-rich water proved perfect for the style, and London, which was the largest market and a hub of innovation. But wherever it began, the style, defined by its pale color and brilliant clarity, took Britain by storm. This bright beer, soon to be known as bitter, became an inseparable part of British identity. It was the pint served in pubs from London to Liverpool. It was the beer that fueled the Industrial Revolution. It was the style that was heavily hopped to survive the long sea voyage to the colonies, becoming the India Pale Ale or IPA. The image of a sparkling, clear pint of ale in a glass became an icon of British culture, as recognizable as a red phone box. And behind every single one of those brilliantly clear pints stood the silent, invisible work of Isinglass. The sturgeon, swimming in the murky depths of the Caspian Sea, would have been very confused to learn that its swim bladder was a key ingredient in the forging of the British Empire's favorite drink. You sit there in the warm, smoky pub, holding a glass of this revolutionary beverage. The light catches in its amber depths. It is clean, bright, and beautiful. The long, sleepy journey, from a prehistoric fish, through the hands of fishermen and merchants on barges and ships, through workshops and ledgers, and into the patient darkness of a cellar, ends here, in this simple, perfect glass. But surely, a substance so strange and so effective couldn't be limited to just one use. The cheerful din of the pub fades away, and you leave the world of bitter ale and its newfound brightness behind. The versatility of Isinglass, this strange, multi-talented collagen, calls you to a new domain. You move from the public house to the private home, from the barrel to the kitchen. You find yourself in the cavernous, bustling kitchen of a wealthy 18th century household. It is a world of heat, steam, and motion. A massive iron range radiates warmth. Copper pots and pans hang from the ceiling like a metallic constellation, and the air is a rich tapestry of smells. Roasting meat, baking bread, exotic spices, and caramelizing sugar. Here, Isinglass will perform a completely different kind of magic. You watch the cook, the busy, no-nonsense ruler of this domain, as she prepares for a grand dinner party. She is working on the final, show-stopping course, dessert. She reaches not for a brewer's paddle, but for a small, neat box. Inside are the same delicate, paper-thin sheets of isinglass you saw prepared in the cutter's workshop. In this context, its clarifying properties are secondary. Here, the cook is interested in its other superpower, its ability to transform a liquid into a solid. When dissolved in hot liquid and allowed to cool, isinglass forms a firm, delicate, and beautifully clear gel. Before the invention of powdered gelatin in the 19th century, isinglass was the premier gelling agent of European haute cuisine. The cook gently warms a mixture of sweetened white wine, lemon juice, and cinnamon in a small copper pot. She adds a carefully measured piece of the isinglass sheet, stirring until the translucent film completely disappears. She is performing a delicate balancing act. Too little and the jelly will be a sad liquid puddle. Too much and it will be a rubbery, unappetizing brick. Getting it right was a mark of a skilled and experienced chef. She then pours the warm liquid into an elaborate, fluted copper mold and sets it aside in a cool pantry to set. Hours later, the result is turned out onto a silver platter. It is a spectacular, shimmering jelly, a captured jewel of wine and spice that trembles tantalizingly. These jellies, along with layered blancmanges and savory aspics holding anything from pheasant to prawns in suspended animation, were the height of culinary fashion. They were architectural feats, designed to dazzle dinner guests with their beauty and the skill they represented. The wobbly, neon-colored dessert you might find at a children's party today is the hyperactive, slightly chaotic great-grandchild of these elegant, aristocratic creations. The social range of this single ingredient is astounding. The same stuff that cleared a grimy dock worker's pint of beer was used to craft a Duchess aux dessert. As you admire the shimmering jelly, a thought occurs. This is, after all, a product derived from a fish. Food historians debate whether the subtle, fishy notes of isinglass were considered a flaw to be masked with strong flavors like lemon, wine, and spice, or if palates of the era were simply more accustomed to such flavors, not even registering them as unpleasant. The highest quality astrakhan leaf was prized for being virtually tasteless, but a cook using a lesser grade would need to be a master of flavor camouflage. The cook's use for isinglass doesn't end there. You see her use a weak, warm solution of it as a delicate edible glue, fastening intricate spun sugar flowers onto a towering cake. But its most quirky application lies outside the kitchen. You move upstairs to a lady's dressing room. On her vanity, next to powders and perfumes, is a small, ornate box. Inside are tiny patches of black silk or taffeta, cut into the shapes of stars, crescent moons, and hearts. The underside of each is coated with a thin layer of isinglass adhesive. This is court plaster. To cover a blemish or simply to add a fashionable beauty spot, the lady would lick the back of the patch, activating the glue, and press it to her cheek. It was the world's first and most glamorous pimple patch, a bizarre and wonderful meeting of medicine, cosmetics, and fish bladder technology. This humble substance was a master of disguise, a clarifier, a gelling agent, and an adhesive. But its story in the world of fine beverages was not quite finished. It had conquered beer, but now it had to face the vineyards. You leave the cozy, domestic world of the English kitchen and its trembling jellies. Your journey takes you across the channel, into the sun-drenched rolling hills of a French vineyard. The air here is different. It's warmer, drier, and smells of sun-baked earth, lavender, and the intoxicating fruity perfume of fermenting grapes. You descend a set of old stone steps into a chai, the French winemaker's cellar. It is ancient, cool, and quiet, perhaps carved directly from the limestone bedrock. Massive oak barrels, stained dark with the ghosts of vintages past, line the walls. The atmosphere is less that of a factory and more of a hushed subterranean chapel. Here you meet the vigneron, the winemaker. He is a man whose life is tied to the soil, the sun, and the seasons. To him, wine is not just a product, it is an expression of a place, the unique terroir of his small patch of land. His approach to his craft is one of deep tradition, reverence, and a healthy dose of skepticism. especially towards newfangled ideas from his beer brewing neighbors across the water. For centuries, French winemakers had their own methods for clarification. Vintners in Bordeaux, for instance, were famous for using fresh egg whites to clarify their robust red wines, a technique that was as much a part of their heritage as the grapes themselves. The arrival of this strange Russian fish bladder product was therefore met with cautious curiosity rather than immediate embrace. But Isinglass, with its unique and gentle touch, soon found its perfect niche. You travel from the red wine cellars of Bordeaux to the hallowed ground of Burgundy, home to the world's most celebrated and delicate white wines. For a winemaker crafting a fine Chardonnay, the robust action of egg whites or the blunt force of clay was too aggressive. These wines are prized for their subtle, ethereal aromas of white flowers, green apple, and toasted nuts. A harsh fining agent could easily strip these delicate notes away, leaving the wine dull and muted. Isinglass, however, proved to be the perfect tool. Its gentle, precise action could pull the fine protein haze from a white wine while leaving its fragile aromatic soul intact. It was a polisher, not a stripper. For this reason, it also became a key of quiet ingredient in the making of champagne, helping to ensure the brilliant, diamond-like clarity that is the hallmark of the celebratory sparkling wine. The work, however, required a touch of almost supernatural delicacy. You watch the vigneron as he prepares a small test batch of isinglass solution. His movements are slow, his brow furrowed with concentration. He is terrified of one thing: overfining. This was the great nightmare of the winemaker. If he were to add even a fraction too much of the powerful collagen solution, its effects would cascade from beneficial to catastrophic. The isinglass would not only bind with the haze particles but would begin to attack the very essence of the wine itself. It would strip the color from a delicate rosé, pull the subtle tannins that give the wine its structure and age-worthiness, and gobble up the complex flavor molecules. In a matter of days, he could turn a priceless vintage into a thin, vapid, grape-flavored water. Vintners and oenologists still debate whether the unique collagen structure of isinglass preferentially binds to certain types of tannins over others, allowing it to soften a wine's harsh edges without completely gutting its structure. What was certain was that it was a powerful and dangerous tool. Unlike in a brewery where isinglass was part of the standard operating procedure in a fine winery, it was more like a specialist's medicine used only when a specific vintage refused to clear on its own through long, patient aging. Many purists of the time, much like the natural wine advocates of today, preferred to use no fining agents at all, believing that any addition was an unwelcome intervention in the wine's natural journey. The vigneron finishes his meticulous work, having added a tiny, precisely measured dose to a single problematic barrel. He has used the ancient river monster's secret to apply the final polishing touch to his liquid art. Here, in the quiet, sun-dappled world of French winemaking, the use of isinglass reached its apex of refinement. But while the artisan was using it by the gram, the world outside was beginning to think in tons. The sleepy manual craft was about to collide with the steam-powered force of the Industrial Revolution. The quiet, sun-drenched French vineyard dissolves into a memory. You are pulled from its pastoral tranquility and plunged into the roaring, steam-powered heart of the 19th century. You are in Victorian England, in a sprawling industrial city where the sky is a permanent hazy gray from the smoke of 1,000 chimneys. The gentle, natural sounds of the winery are replaced by a deafening, rhythmic clang and hiss. The sleepy, manual craft you have been following is about to wake up, whether it wants to or not. You are standing inside a large brick building, an isinglass manufactory. Gone is the small, dusty workshop of the solitary London cutter. This is a different beast entirely. The vast open room is a forest of machinery, a confusing web of leather belts snaking across the high ceilings, all driven by the relentless, pulsing heart of the factory, a massive single-cylinder steam engine. Its great flywheel turns with an inexorable, hypnotic rhythm, its piston pumping like the lung of a sleeping iron giant. The noise is immense, a symphony of grinding gears, the percussive crash of machinery, and the constant, high-pressure hiss of steam. You watch the process, the same one you saw performed by a single artisan, now scaled up to an incredible degree. Bales of the raw, hard isinglass scrolls from Russia are soaked in huge vats. Then the softened sheets are fed not into the patient hands of a craftsman with a mallet, but into the maw of a pair of giant steam-powered rollers. These iron cylinders, weighing several tons each, mash and flatten the collagen with a force no human could ever replicate. The rhythmic ker-thump of the rollers echoes through the building, a sound loud enough to shake the floor beneath your feet. From the rollers, the now paper-thin sheets are moved to the cutting machines. Men and women with blank, focused expressions feed the sheets into chopping and shredding machines that clatter and whir, spitting out the finished product with mechanical speed and uniformity. A single machine in a single hour can produce what the old-fashioned cutter would have taken a week to make. The sleepy country lane of production has become a 10-lane industrial highway, moving with a speed that would make rush-hour traffic in Hanoi look peaceful. You look at the faces of the workers. In the dim, gas-lit interior, they move with a practiced monotony, their bodies swaying in time with the machines they tend. Social historians debate whether these new factory jobs represented a genuine opportunity for workers, a steady wage away from the uncertainties of farm labor, or were simply another form of monotonous, low-wage drudgery in the rapidly industrializing cities. Watching a young boy whose only job is to sweep the isinglass shreds into a bin for 10 hours a day, you can guess which side of the debate you fall on. The final product is also transformed by this new industrial mindset. You move to the packing room, where you see not just plain sacks of shreds but neatly printed tins and cardboard boxes. This is the age of the patent product. The factory produces Gridley's patent isinglass and field-celebrated finings, complete with handsome labels and bold claims of their unparalleled clarifying power. Some even sell the isinglass pre-dissolved and pressed into a solid cake with tartaric acid. For the brewer, this was a revolution in convenience. No more sourcing sour beer, no more long, slow dissolving. Just break off a piece of the cake, drop it in water, and you have instant finings. It was the 19th century equivalent of just add water. This massive increase in production made isinglass cheaper and more accessible than ever. These factories weren't just supplying the breweries of Britain. They were exporting their refined products across the globe, to the sprawling colonies of the British Empire and to the rapidly growing United States. The process had been perfected and commodified. But this entire roaring, clattering, profitable industry was built upon a single, fragile foundation: the steady supply of a specific fish bladder from the rivers of a rival empire thousands of miles away. As the demand grew ever greater, that foundation was about to show its cracks. The rhythmic, deafening roar of the English factory fades, replaced by the sound of a ship's horn and the vast, open quiet of the Atlantic Ocean. You journey westward, following the path of the countless emigrants seeking a new life in the New World. You arrive in the United States in the latter half of the 19th century, a nation brimming with a restless, inventive energy. In the bustling breweries of Philadelphia, Boston, and New York, a familiar process is underway. Brewers, many of them German and English immigrants, are working to satisfy the nation's growing thirst for beer. They too are chasing the brilliant, bright ale that has become the standard of quality, but they have a problem. The magical ingredient, the isinglass that makes it all possible, is a transatlantic headache. It is expensive, its price inflated by the Russian monopoly, the British refiners, and the cost of shipping. The supply chain is long and fragile. A trade war, a real war, or even a bad storm season in the North Atlantic could disrupt the supply for months. To the pragmatic, self-reliant mindset of the American entrepreneur, this dependence on a single distant foreign source was inefficient, costly, and frankly, a little insulting. It was time for some good old-fashioned Yankee ingenuity to find a local solution, a declaration of independence from fish bladder tyranny. The first thought, of course, was the sturgeon. The great rivers of North America had once teemed with them, but by the late 19th century, the combination of overfishing and industrial pollution had already decimated their populations. They could not form the basis of a reliable, large-scale industry, so the brewers and entrepreneurs turned their gaze from the rivers to the boundless ocean, and to the backbone of the New England maritime economy, the cod. Your journey takes you north, to the port of Gloucester, Massachusetts. The air here is sharp, cold and saturated with the smell of salt and fish. The harbor is a forest of masts from the hundreds of fishing schooners that call this town home. On the shore, acres of land are covered in wooden racks or flakes, where split cod are laid out to dry in the sun and wind. This is the fishing capital of America. For centuries, the fishermen of Gloucester had sailed their sturdy dories to the Grand Banks, hauling in cod by the ton. The fish were gutted at sea, and the offal, including the swim bladders, was simply shoveled overboard. But now those previously worthless organs had a value. A new domestic isinglass industry was born right here, in the salty, windswept heart of the cod trade. Fishermen were now paid to carefully remove and save the swim bladders, known in the trade as sounds. Small factories smelling strongly of the sea sprang up along the waterfront to process them. The methods were largely the same as in the British factories, soaking, rolling, and shredding. But the raw material was different. The swim bladder of a cod is smaller and structurally different from that of a giant beluga sturgeon. The resulting American isinglass was functional, but generally considered a step down in quality from the Russian import. Brewing historians debate whether American-made isinglass was ever truly equal in quality to the Russian original, or if it was simply a good enough substitute born of economic necessity. For the average American brewer, who wasn't trying to craft a world-class export ale, but simply a good, clear, profitable beer for the local market, good enough was perfect, especially when it came at half the price. A choice emerged in the market. The imported Russian leaf isinglass remained the gold standard, the premium product for the finest ales. The domestic product made from cod and hake became the everyday workhorse. It was like buying the expensive imported olive oil for a special dinner, but using the cheaper domestic brand for your day-to-day cooking. This American innovation successfully broke the European monopoly, at least in the North American market. It was a classic 19th century story of identifying a problem and solving it with local resources and industrial savvy. The industry, both in Europe and America, now seemed more stable than ever, with two independent sources of raw material. But both were built on the same quiet, unexamined assumption that the fish would last forever. The seemingly endless schools of cod in the Atlantic and the ancient resilient sturgeon in the Caspian were treated as infinite resources. The story now takes a darker, quieter turn as that assumption begins to unravel. You leave the bustling, can-do shores of industrial America and travel back across the world, back to the source, to the wide, muddy delta of the Volga River. You are also traveling forward, into the churn and upheaval of the 20th century. The landscape is familiar, but the atmosphere has changed. The old, timeless rhythm of the fishery is gone, replaced by a more frantic, more desperate energy. The fishing boats now have sputtering engines, and the traditional nets have been replaced with finer, stronger, and far less forgiving modern materials. The demand for the sturgeon's gifts, particularly the black pearls of its caviar, has exploded into a global obsession, and the pressure on the ancient river monster is becoming unbearable. For millions of years, the sturgeon had thrived, its life cycle perfectly attuned to the rhythms of the river and the sea. But this ancient equilibrium was no match for human appetite and industry. The first blow was simply a matter of scale. The relentless, ever more efficient fishing, driven by the astronomical prices for caviar on the world market, was removing adult fish faster than they could be replaced. The sturgeon is a creature of slow time. It can live for over a century and may not even reach sexual maturity for 15 or 20 years. It could not withstand the onslaught of a species that thinks in terms of quarterly profits. As legal catches became restricted to try and manage the decline, a thriving and vicious black market emerged. Poachers, operating outside any law, cast their nets with impunity, further accelerating the creature's silent slide towards oblivion. Then came the second, and final, blow. It was not a net, but a wall. In the pursuit of progress, the new Soviet state began to tame its great rivers, harnessing their power for electricity. You stand on the banks of the Volga and witness the construction of a monstrous concrete dam, a monument to industrial ambition that spans the river from one bank to the other. It is a sheer, insurmountable wall of steel and poured concrete, designed to hold back the entire river and feed its power into giant turbines. For the sturgeon, this wall was an apocalypse. The creature is anadromous. It spends its adult life in the salt water of the Caspian Sea, but it is born with an ancient, unbreakable imperative to return to the freshwater gravel beds far upstream, where it was born to spawn the next generation. For millennia, this journey was the central drama of its existence. Now the path was blocked. You can almost feel the deep biological confusion of the great fish as they swim upstream, only to meet a dead end, a roaring, vibrating wall where a flowing river used to be. The life cycle, unbroken since the time of the dinosaurs, was severed. The sturgeon, it turned out, did not have a very effective lobbyist in the Kremlin. Ecologists and historians still debate which factor was more devastating to the sturgeon: the relentless pressure of overfishing that depleted the adult stock, or the insurmountable obstacle of industrial damming that prevented them from reproducing. In truth, it was a brutal 1-2 punch. Overfishing emptied the river of its present, and the dams erased its future. The creature that had survived the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs was proving no match for a 5-year economic plan. The consequence for our sleepy story was simple and dire. Fewer sturgeon meant less isinglass. The supply, which had flowed reliably for centuries, began to slow to a trickle. The bales of raw astrakhan leaf arriving in London and other ports became rarer and astronomically more expensive. The great isinglass factories you saw, with their steam-powered rollers and armies of workers, found their essential raw material becoming a precious, endangered commodity. It was a classic supply chain crisis, the 20th century equivalent of a global microchip shortage, but for an ancient fish bladder. The foundation of the entire industry was crumbling. The world, and particularly the world of brewing, needed a new solution, and fast. The silent decline of the sturgeon was about to open the door for a host of new competitors, ready to take its place. The ancient sturgeon swims silently towards the twilight of its existence, and with it, the global dominance of its most famous byproduct. In the breweries and wineries of the 20th century, the dwindling supply and skyrocketing price of isinglass create a crisis that is also an opportunity. The market, after all, abhors a vacuum. With the old king dying, a host of usurpers born from the slaughterhouse, the seashore, and the laboratory now steps forward to claim the throne of clarification. The most obvious heir apparent is gelatin. Like isinglass, it is a fining agent made from the protein collagen. The principle is exactly the same, but its source could not be more different. Instead of being harvested from a rare, ancient, and majestic fish, gelatin is a mass-produced byproduct of the vast industrial meatpacking industry. It is rendered from the skin, bones, and connective tissues of cattle and pigs. While isinglass was a story of riverbanks and fishing boats, gelatin is a story of factory farms and abattoirs. Its advantages are brutally simple. It is fantastically cheap, and the supply is as vast and reliable as humanity's appetite for meat. Industrial production means its quality is consistent and predictable, sold in standardized grades. It is, however, a blunter instrument. While high-quality isinglass was a fine-toothed saw, capable of delicate, precise work, gelatin is more of a sledgehammer. It clarifies effectively, but its more aggressive action carries a higher risk of stripping flavor and color if the brewer is not careful. But the competition doesn't stop there. Science and industry offer a whole menu of new options. From the sea comes Irish moss, a type of reddish-purple seaweed. It works in a completely different way. Instead of being added to the cold, finished beer, this quirky seaweed is tossed into the kettle during the boil. The active ingredient, carrageenan, works its magic in the hot, turbulent liquid, encouraging the unwanted proteins to coagulate into large, heavy clumps that settle out much more efficiently later on. It's a preemptive strike against haze. From the earth, the old method of using bentonite clay is rediscovered and industrialized. Great deposits of the volcanic clay are mined, purified, and milled into a fine, consistent powder. It becomes a favorite of winemakers in particular, as it is highly effective, inexpensive, and carries none of the animal product baggage of isinglass or gelatin. And from the laboratory comes the truly modern solution: synthetic polymers. Powders with unwieldy names like polyvinyl polypyrrolidone, or PVPP, are invented. These are essentially custom-designed plastics, engineered at a molecular level to be perfect little magnets for the specific polyphenols that cause haze. It is a solution of incredible efficiency, but one that feels a universe away from the organic, accidental magic of a dried fish bladder. Brewing chemists still debate the relative merits and molecular efficiency of these various fining agents, with each having its own advocates and detractors. The modern brewer now has a dizzying array of choices, more confusing than trying to navigate a roundabout in Ho Chi Minh City on a scooter. They can mix and match, using Irish moss in the boil, perhaps followed by a gentle dose of gelatin or isinglass in the conditioning tank, fine-tuning their process for the desired result. The old singular reliance on the sturgeon is a thing of the past, and where does this leave our sleepy hero? Isinglass is not driven to extinction, but it is pushed from the center of the stage to the quiet periphery. It becomes a niche product, an expensive specialty item. For the giant breweries churning out millions of barrels of mass-market lager, it is far too costly and difficult to source. But it survives and even thrives in the one place where its unique, gentle touch is still considered the undisputed gold standard, the world of traditional cask-conditioned British ale. For these purists, Isinglass isn't just a tool, it's a vital part of their heritage. It becomes the artisanal, handcrafted option, a badge of honor signifying a commitment to the old ways. But this continued use of an animal product alongside its chief rival gelatin would soon create a new and unexpected dilemma, one born not of science, but of conscience. The world of brewing has modernized, and the old king, Isinglass, now sits in a comfortable, if slightly dusty, state of semi-retirement. It is no longer the undisputed ruler of clarification, but a respected elder statesman, its use confined to the traditionalist enclaves that still value its unique talents. But looking back on the centuries of its reign, a quiet, sleepy argument persists among those who spend their time poring over old ledgers and brewery records. It is a question that seems simple on the surface, but reveals the complex economics of a bygone era. Historians still argue whether the cost of isinglass significantly impacted the price of a common pint. You find yourself back in the quiet, candlelit world of the counting house, the great ledger open before you. On one side of the debate, the argument for a significant impact seems obvious. You trace the journey of the isinglass with your finger, not on a map, but through the columns of expenses. There is the initial cost from the Russian fishermen on the distant Caspian shore. There is the markup from the powerful Muscovy Company merchants. There is the immense cost of the slow, arduous transport over land and sea. There is the fee for the London refiner who turned the raw scrolls into a finished product. At every single step, a profit was made, a cost was added. By the time a pound of the finest Astrakhan leaf isinglass reached a brewer's cellar, it was weight for weight one of the most expensive things in the entire building, far pricier than the humble malt and hops that made up the bulk of the beer. Proponents of this view argue that this high cost had to be passed on to the consumer. A brewer, especially a small publican brewing for his own tavern, would have felt the sting of a high-priced bale of isinglass in his accounts. The price of his final product, the pint of ale sold over the bar, would have to reflect these overheads. In this model, the London drinker's wallet was directly, if unknowingly, tied to the success of the sturgeon catch thousands of miles away. A brewer who chose to forego isinglass or used a cheaper, less effective alternative could undercut his competitors, offering a cloudy but cheaper pint. Clarity, therefore, came at a premium. But then you turn the page of the ledger and consider the other side of the argument. This view holds that the cost of isinglass was, in the grand scheme of things, little more than a rounding error. While the price per pound was indeed very high, the actual amount needed was incredibly small. A single ounce of high-quality isinglass could effectively treat a large barrel containing dozens of gallons, which would be served as hundreds of individual pints. When you divide that high cost by the huge volume of the final product, the expense per pint becomes minuscule, a tiny fraction of a penny. It was less than the sliver of interest accrued on your bank account while you sleep. Advocates of this position point to other, far more monstrous expenses that brewers had to contend with. The single biggest factor in the price of British beer for centuries was the malt tax. First introduced in the 17th century, this tax was a primary source of revenue for the government. and it placed a heavy, unavoidable burden on every brewer in the kingdom. Compared to the king's tax, the cost of fish bladders was trivial. Add to this the fluctuating price of hops, the cost of labor, the rent on a city center pub, and the expense of the coal to fire the kettle, and the Isinglass begins to look like a very minor character in this economic drama. The truth, as it often does, likely slumbers somewhere in the middle. For a giant industrial brewery, the cost was easily absorbed. For a small independent brewer, the high upfront cost of purchasing a whole bale of the stuff might have been a genuine financial hardship, even if it paid for itself over time. Some historians have even speculated about a quirky, informal system of cooperative finings, where a few small publicans might have pooled their money to buy a single expensive parcel from a merchant, then divided the precious shreds amongst themselves. It's a uniquely pleasant way to spend a Sunday afternoon, especially here in Tanhua, pondering the microeconomics of long-dead English brewers. Ultimately, the debate might be less about the actual cost and more about the perceived value. To the brewers who insisted on using it, Isinglass was not an expense, but an investment in quality, the thing that guaranteed a bright pint that would enhance their reputation and keep the customers coming back. But this whole debate, centered on shillings and pence, was soon to be overtaken by a completely new way of valuing a product. A new question was emerging, one that had little to do with economics and everything to do with ethics. The sleepy debate over the shillings and pence on a brewer's ledger fades into the academic quiet of the past. Your journey now lurches forward, through the decades, arriving in the bright, noisy, and hyper-aware world of the 21st century. You are standing in a modern craft beer taproom. The air is clean, the music is probably a bit too loud, and a long, colorful list of beers is displayed on a chalkboard with elaborate descriptions of tropical hops, roasted malts, and exotic yeast strains. The world of brewing has never been more vibrant or diverse. But a new question now hangs in the air, a question your 18th century cellarman would have found completely bewildering. It is no longer just about clarity or cost, but about conscience. You are a modern beer drinker, and you happen to be a vegan. For decades, as vegetarianism and then veganism grew from fringe movements into mainstream lifestyle choices, consumers became diligent detectives. They learned to scan ingredient lists for hidden animal products, gelatin in marshmallows, whey in potato chips, carmine in red candy. But for the most part, beer seemed like a safe harbor. Its ingredients were simple, ancient, and beautifully plant-based: water, grain, hops, and yeast. What could be more vegan than that? And then, the long, sleepy secret you have been following for this entire journey comes bubbling to the surface of modern consciousness. The reason that beautiful, traditional pint of British bitter is so famously, flawlessly bright is because of isinglass, a clarifying agent made from the dried swim bladders of a fish. You can almost feel the collective global record scratch moment as thousands of beer lovers discover this fact for the first time. Wait, there's what in my beer? It is a surprising, unwelcome, and frankly kind of weird revelation. You will not find subtle notes of sturgeon byproduct listed on any tasting menu. This discovery creates a dilemma for both the traditional brewer and the modern consumer. For the brewer, particularly the custodians of the British cask ale tradition, Isinglass is not just an ingredient, it is the bedrock of their craft. It is the only way, in their eyes, to achieve the perfect, brilliant clarity that their style demands. But now, they face pressure from a vocal and growing segment of the market that finds the practice unacceptable. Do they abandon a centuries-old technique for the sake of a new ethical standard? For the vegan beer drinker, life suddenly gets more complicated. They can no longer walk into a pub and order a pint with confidence. They have to ask questions, to probe. And this is where a quirky modern solution to this ancient problem emerges. You see a person at the bar pull out their smartphone. They are not checking social media. They are consulting a specialized app or website, the most famous of which is Barnivore. This is a massive crowdsourced database with a single noble purpose: to act as a global directory of vegan-friendly alcohol. It is a monument to grassroots consumer activism. People from all over the world email breweries, wineries, and distilleries, Ask them point blank if they use isinglass, gelatin, honey, or other animal products, and then post the official responses for all to see. This pressure, amplified by the internet, has a real effect. Breweries begin to see a marketing advantage in transparency. You start seeing new phrases on beer labels, unfined and unfiltered, or the simple, proud declaration, vegan-friendly. Sociologists and market analysts continue to debate whether the push for vegan-friendly brewing is a niche trend driven by a vocal minority or represents a fundamental, long-term shift in consumer values towards transparency and plant-based products. Whatever the driver, the industry has responded. Many brewers have switched to vegan-friendly alternatives. Others have simply embraced the haze, a move made wonderfully convenient by the explosive popularity of the naturally cloudy New England or hazy IPA, a style that made a virtue out of skipping the fining process entirely. The story of Isinglass has arrived in the present day, its journey taking it from a miracle ingredient to a source of modern controversy. Its role is now questioned, its necessity debated. But even as it fades from many recipes, its legacy remains, embedded in the very idea of what a proper beer should look like. The ethics of the modern pint have been established, and the battle lines drawn between the traditional and the vegan-friendly. Armed with this knowledge, you are now a modern Isinglass detective. The hunt for traces of this ancient clarifier in the 21st century is a sleepy, subtle art. There are no dramatic chase scenes, only quiet observation and a bit of acquired knowledge. So how do you spot the ghost of the sturgeon in your glass? Your first and easiest method is to simply read. In the modern era of consumer transparency, many brewers will tell you everything you need to know. You are in the beer aisle of a large store, a library of colorful cans and bottles. You pick one up. Look for the magic words: unfined, unfiltered, naturally hazy, and of course the gold standard, suitable for vegans. These are the clear, unambiguous signs that Isinglass and its animal-based cousins have not been invited to the party. The absence of these words isn't a guarantee of its presence, but their inclusion is a guarantee of its absence. But the real heartland of Isinglass use today is not in a can or a bottle. To find it, you must go to a traditional pub, the kind with worn wooden floors and a row of ornate swan-necked handles at the bar. You are looking for cask-conditioned ale, or what is often called real ale. This is the last great bastion of our sleepy hero. Unlike modern keg beer, which is filtered, pasteurized, and force-carbonated at the brewery, cask ale is a living thing. It is placed in the cask unfiltered, with live yeast, and undergoes a final, gentle fermentation in the pub's cellar. It is then served using only a hand-pull pump, without any extra carbon dioxide. Because it is unfiltered, it arrives at the pub cloudy. And because the public for the last 300 years has expected their pint of bitter to be brilliantly clear, something must be done. In the cool quiet of the pub cellar, the publican adds a measure of Isinglass finings directly to the cask. Over the next few days, that familiar sleepy process of settling occurs, and the beer drops bright. So here is your most reliable clue. If you are drinking a hand-pulled pint of crystal-clear British bitter, golden ale, or mild, you are almost certainly enjoying the work of Isinglass. Can you actually see the evidence? It is exceptionally rare but possible. Imagine it's the end of a quiet Sunday afternoon. The pub is nearly empty. The cask is almost finished. To get the last few pints out, the cask might be tilted, disturbing the thick bed of lees at the bottom. If you are very lucky and you hold your glass to the light, you might just see it. Faint, ethereal, wispy strands of a gelatinous substance, like a tiny, shredded ghost, drifting in the bottom of your pint. This is the spent Isinglass, the physical evidence of the collagen net having done its job. Finding it is the brewing equivalent of spotting a rare bird. This dedication to Isinglass in the real ale world is a matter of fierce debate. Brewing purists and modernists still debate whether dropping bright in a cask with Isinglass produces a superior clarity and mouthfeel compared to the harsher clarity achieved by modern filtration. The traditionalists argue that their method is gentler, that it doesn't strip the beer of its delicate body and flavor the way forcing it through a filter does. They believe it results in a softer, more nuanced pint. To them, the clarity from Isinglass isn't just an aesthetic. It's a vital component of the final beer's character. It's the difference between a shirt made of soft natural linen and one made of stiff synthetic polyester. Of course, there are exceptions. The world of cask ale is also evolving, with many craft brewers now producing unfined, hazy versions to cater to modern tastes. And in the wider world of beer, Isinglass is almost entirely absent. German lagers governed by their famous purity laws forbid it. Belgian ales celebrate their yeastiness, and the big macro breweries that produce the vast majority of the world's beer use high-tech filtration systems. But now you know. You have the tools. You can walk into almost any pub in the world and, with a reasonable degree of certainty, identify where the faint, fishy ghost of the past might still be lingering. After this long journey, you've certainly earned a pint. You hold the pint glass in your hand, the cool condensation beating on its surface. The beer inside is brilliantly, beautifully bright. You look through it, through the clear golden liquid, and you see not just the other side of the room, but the faint, shimmering ghosts of the entire journey you have just taken. It is all there, reflected in this one, simple, quiet glass. You see the ancient Sumerian, crouched by a communal pot, forced to sip his chunky, bread-filled brew through a long reed straw. You see the Roman citizen in a smoky tavern, drinking his hazy, seawater-seasoned wine from a clay cup, oblivious to the very concept of a clear drink. The memory of a whole world that lived in a murky, cloudy reality is right there. And then you see the slow, patient beginnings of the change. The quiet monk in his stone cellar, seeking a purer connection to God through a purer ale. The hardy fisherman on the shores of the Caspian Sea, hauling a prehistoric armored monster from the depths and discovering the strange hidden treasure within its body. You can almost feel the stiff, dry texture of the finished isinglass scroll, a humble object that would travel thousands of miles, passing from the calloused hands of a Russian bargeman to the ink-stained fingers of a London accountant. Every slow, sleepy, and profoundly uneventful step of that journey is contained in the silent clarity of your pint. The golden age of isinglass was a perfect accidental storm. The invention of pale malt and the affordability of glass vessels created a sudden, fierce demand for a beer that was beautiful to look at. And isinglass was there, ready, the perfect tool for the moment. And so the ultimate question that lingers is one that historians of technology and culture quietly ponder. Was isinglass a revolutionary catalyst that created new tastes, or was it simply a convenient tool that happened to be in the right place at the right time? Did the brewer's ability to produce a bright beer create the public's desire for it, or was isinglass just the long-awaited answer to a problem everyone already wanted to solve? It is the great, sleepy chicken and egg question of brewing history. And then you see the slow, inevitable decline. The sturgeon, the ancient source of it all, dwindling under the twin pressures of industrial fishing and impassable concrete dams. The rise of cheaper, more efficient, and less romantic usurpers born from the factory farm and the chemistry lab. And finally, the modern beer drinker, holding not a pewter tankard but a smartphone, asking not about clarity or price, but about ethics. The entire story is a perfect, quiet microcosm of our industrial world, from natural resource to global commodity to ecological crisis, and finally, to niche artisanal product. But the ghost of the sturgeon has not vanished entirely. Even as its use fades from the mainstream, isinglass has found a quiet, noble retirement. Beyond the last bastions of cask ale, it is now a precious and specialized tool for museum conservators. The same pure, strong fish bladder collagen is used as a high-grade adhesive to repair the fragile tears in ancient manuscripts and delicate medieval parchments. The very same substance that once clarified a working man's pint might now be holding together a priceless illuminated Bible, its final act a quiet one of preservation. The last glimmer of our story now resides in the archives, a silent guardian of an even older history. And with that, the long, slow settle of our journey is complete. The story has dropped bright, and so, the journey comes to its quiet conclusion. The story is told, and the great globe-spanning, centuries-long process has finally come to rest in the bottom of your glass. The memory of the sturgeon can now fade, swimming back into the deep, murky waters of the past. The roar of the Victorian factory softens into a distant hum, and then into silence. The gentle, rhythmic scratching of the clerk's quill pen on the old ledger ceases, the final word written, the ink now dry. The cellarman has hammered the last bung into the cask, and a profound and peaceful stillness settles over the cool, damp, subterranean world. All of the effort, all of the travel, all of the slow, patient waiting has led to this moment of absolute, untroubled calm. There is nothing left to do now but to let the last thoughts drift away, like the final, sleepy particles settling in the dark. Let the gentle weight of the story press you softly into your pillow. Let the background noises of your own room become a soft, lulling murmur. There is only stillness now, only quiet. The last glimmer fades, and all that is left is the deep, comfortable and welcoming silence of the night.